Hej! Idag har jag träffat Maureen J. Germain, författare till vår nästa boklansering, den femte dimensionen. Maureen är något av en expert på livets dimensioner, skulle jag säga. Hon kallas för den praktiska mystiken och det finns en anledning till det. Hon är väldigt duktig på att plocka det där abstrakta ner till en konkret nivå som är så användbart för sådana som till exempel mig. Jag är jätteglad att få ha träffat henne personligen och vi har haft ett spännande samtal. Det är en kraftfull kvinna och jag skulle säga att det finns många anledningar att lyssna in. Häng med! Good morning, Maureen. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
So tell me, you are in New York right now?
Yes.
And what time is it?
6 a.m.
So you had a good night's sleep?
I did.
Wonderful. I'm glad that you're here with me.
Me too.
Great. So Maureen, you are the author of Waking Up in 5D, which is the book that we are launching in Sweden any day soon. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we want to talk a little bit about you as a person. Who are you, and so on. So to get a feeling of who you are, can you tell us, where do you come from? Who are you, in short?
I grew up on a farm, a very large vegetable farm in the Midwest. My father was a vegetable grower, and then we also had greenhouses and grew English cucumbers. In fact, my father was the first person to bring the English cucumber. We call it English cucumber, but it was really based in the Netherlands. Those long European cucumbers.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah. My father was the first one to bring them to the US and start selling the seed and selling equipment so that they could be shrink wrapped, Yeah. And I worked on that farm right up until I got married. I went to college. And on summers I was on the farm. I remember asking my dad at one point, "Why am I the one that's doing the seedling? My wedding's tomorrow." And he said, "You're the best person I've got." So it was kind of funny. And then I was always interested in esoteric things. So as a child, when everyone else was looking at comic books, I had the dictionary, the Lives of the Saints, that I was reading. And one day it wasn't in the bookshelf where it belonged. It was a beautiful book, and it had gold leaf on the edges and, gold embossing. And I think my mother hid it because maybe she was worried about a kid playing with the book. And I don't think about any of these things because I'm a kid, but I think to myself, where's that book? And immediately had a picture in my mind. It was on a tall shelf in a closet. So I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and climbed on the chair and got the book out, read it, and then I very intentionally put it in the bookcase where I used to find it. Now, if you were my mother and you found the book where you had not left it, get the message. We never spoke about it, but I remember that event. So I've always been interested in spiritual things. And growing up, I had, a good, strong, basic Catholic upbringing and went to Catholic grade school. And then as an adult, I had a family. I have 4 sons that are adults. And I pursued a career in the corporate world, all the while practicing my spiritual ideas. And then
on the side?
I'm sorry?
You practice your spiritual ideas on the side?
Yes, well, and I applied them in my job without saying much about it to anyone, of course. And then started study groups, book club groups, and realized that I really had a certain knack for teaching, and I always wanted to help people. So I really wanted to write a book. That was my goal. So I thought about it and realized that I was really good at sharing ideas with people. So I decided, well, I'll teach a seminar and then I'll be able to write the book. The seminar will help me write the book. And so my very first book was called Be a Genie, and it's about sacred geometry and manifestation and how you can use sacred geometry to manifest. And then I became introduced to the work of Drunvalo Melchizedek and the Merkaba, and I began doing that work and teaching it within a year. And that was in 1995 that I began teaching that. And I traveled all over the US on weekends teaching the meditation, the Merkaba, at a very generous vacation.
Children and a husband and a job on the side.
Mm-hmm. That's the husband. My husband and I had split up in 94. So at that point, I was a single parent. And I traveled, initially, I only traveled on weekends that my son's father had the children, so that I wasn't taking away from family time.
It's a hard job to do what you love, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it was kind of interesting because when you're doing what you love, and especially this kind of work, you come back energized. I used to joke around, people say, how can you pull all this off? And I'd say, well, when a banker makes a loan, he makes a little money on the side. So when I teach these spiritual classes, I'm getting spiritual energy as well. I'm not just being the teacher and putting out, I'm gaining because I'm helping people, and that grows, the energy that moves through me, some of it sticks to me.
It's very true though.
Yeah.
I can recognize that. Question, where are we today? Looking back, so I know that you're talking about the fifth dimension. It's not only about yourself, right? It's about the society and the world we live in.
Yes. Well, I think the biggest aha about being fifth dimensional is this idea that we could become fifth dimensional and then slide back. Because practically every teacher out there will say, we're becoming fifth dimensional. Mm-hmm. Nobody is willing to own the fact that we're already fifth dimensional and that we're sliding back and then we're going up and back. Now, I didn't know it either, but I had enough experiences that I began to get information. And what happened to me is things started disappearing. You'd put something down, maybe your sunglasses, and you'd go back for them because you had to go back out, and they're not where you left them. And you think, that's funny. They were right here. I just put them right here. You weren't tired. You weren't being forgetful, So you find a spare, you go out, and then you come back and you put away your sunglasses, forgetting that they're the spare. And there's the pair that you were looking for all along. Mm-hmm. So I started asking about what's going on and what's happening. And the first thing that happened to me, I'm going to come back to this full circle, is I was driving with my son. I was in the front seat and my car started making a strange noise. And I had no idea what was going on. But I said out loud, what's going on with the car? And immediately out of my mouth came the words, something about the chain belt and something else. And I burst out laughing. I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever said. I only know that it's important to change the oil. I don't know anything else about cars. And so for these words to come out of my mouth were absolute. It turned out they were absolutely true, but I had no reason to know that. So in meditation, I asked, how come I knew that, but I don't know other stuff? And how come I know other stuff, but I don't know stuff that I need to know? And I was told, you asked, what is going on? So I began to think about this. And when you look at the 5 interview questions that we're all taught when we're children, and this is true in any language, who, what, why, when, where, and how in English, all of them lead you down a path so that you can solve a problem. So who ate the cookies? When were they eaten? If it's too late, they might not eat dinner. Why are the cookies gone? Because we didn't leave anything out. We didn't leave enough fruit out. So there's all these questions that lead you to solve the problem. And we tend to look for, why did something happen so I can fix it? Why did I get a flat tire? Well, I drove over a nail. I got to be more careful when I see nails, like that. But the what question is completely open-ended. So I began teaching my students, stuff happens that you don't understand. you can ask the what question. And I was also asking a question around the idea that when something was disappearing, I was asking, where did my stuff go? Remember the where, so I could go get it? And I was always told it's in a higher dimension. Now, as a mystic, that's fine. I mean, that's not upsetting. Okay, it's in a higher dimension. Well, I want it back. Because as a mom, I'm used to saying, if you got my scissors, my kitchen scissors are gone. I need them. And they'd bring them back. So I figured I'd just announce, I want it back. And that's what we started doing. But then when this what thing happened, I started telling people, just ask the what question. What's going on? And it's probably the best question to ask to stay in 5D, because it's non-pejorative, it's non-judgmental, it's completely neutral. And you will get this wide berth. So when I asked this question, almost accidentally, when something had disappeared, and I was with my son, one of my sons, who was very grounded, and something had disappeared out of his book bag that he had just put in there, I said to him, well, honey, it's probably in a higher dimension. We'll just ask for it to come back. Now, you would never say that in public. At least I wouldn't. But I was with my son, and I was just so accustomed to saying that and having stuff reappear. By this time, he pulled everything out of the book bag. Everything went back in the book bag. I said, come back in the kitchen and finish your story. He did. And then I said, now go back and look and see if it's there. And it was. The vibes coming into us are supporting our good behavior, our ability to make a decision that's more conducive to our ideal choices. But then we slip back into our human foibles. We behave badly. We get upset. Someone pushes our buttons and we drop back. So we're all doing that all the time. And the proof of it is when I ask this question in the audience, you know, with a big group, and I say, how many of you have lost something and then have it reappear exactly where you left it, you know, sometime later, whether an hour later or 2 days later? Over 80% of the room raises their hand.
Yeah.
So I know it's happening to everybody, or most everybody. And I think a lot of people don't track, and they're not remembering that that actually happened to them. Because when something happens that you usually dismiss as weird or strange, you tend to dismiss it and forget it. You don't have a framework within to arrange it or to look at it differently. But when you decide that you're going to pay attention to being 5D and you're going to start to watch, you're going to see all kinds of things that you had written off as weird are really the new normal.
I can sense that. And actually today I have read a lot of the book. In Swedish it's called femte dimensionen, the fifth dimension. And I think that you have a very good sense of explaining I actually just told my colleague, she's really good, she's very abstract, but she's really good in explaining this abstract in a very, very concrete way.
Thank you.
So it's, thank you for doing that for us.
My pleasure. I think it's part of this thing that I came in to do, because I've always been able to take the abstract and put it in practical terms. And that's why I had the nickname of the practical mystic, because someone who was writing a book about people like me labeled me that way. And I thought, you know, that's kind of true. I want to be really practical. I want to be down to earth and help people realize that this isn't just woo-woo. This is real and tangible.
You are in New York City. What date is it?
9/11.
Yeah. It's 18 years since the terror event.
You know, it's funny. I've lived in Manhattan about 10 years, and I've spent a lot of time away, either traveling or spending time in a second home in other cities. But I've always maintained my New York space. And at one point I was told to move into that neighborhood, which I did. I lived in that neighborhood for about 4 years. And my apartment overlooked the new World Trade Center and overlooked that whole area. And I was told to anchor a certain energy in to that neighborhood and to work with the energy to transform it and transmute it. It never had occurred to me to do such a thing. But once I was there and I held a few workshops in my apartment, it was very clear, yeah, you need to do this. So, yeah, it's a big tragedy.
Very big. What do you think, is there anything you can sense in the energies today? Is there anything?
Well, I can tell you that there were many souls that were completely surprised and didn't know what to do or where they were going. And many of the therapy people that I knew or worked with would say, you know, when they were working on a client, other souls would come to them asking for help. I can also tell you that one of my students, who was a musician, very well known in Japan, said that he'd had a dream that morning where he was escaping from a very tall building, and he knew it was in an urban environment, and he knew he had to get out, and he was, you know, like racing down the stairs to get away. And he called two people and relayed the dream that morning before it actually happened. And in the book, Waking Up in 5D, I explain how there's more than one version of you. So there's more than one Maureen, there's more than one you, and there's other versions of me who are working on the same things I'm working on. And perhaps as we progress, I'll take a different tack. Let's say I want to pursue the spiritual part of teaching, and maybe another version of me will pursue a certain aspect of writing. And so I believe that this man had that experience because another version of himself was physically involved in it, and he was having like a premonition because he wasn't there, and he knew it was an urban environment, and he felt like it was in the future because he didn't have any fear. But going further into that, when I first became, a lot of information that I have just kind of came in, and it was so real to me that I didn't have the need to go find and prove it. But this whole business of other versions of you, and I used to joke around with myself that I wanted to be the first version of me to publish or to be out there. And, you know, one day I woke up and I thought, that's pretty arrogant. That's probably another version of me already well published, and that's why I can get where I'm going. You know, it just turned me around, and it was like, oh my goodness. But the other thing is, one of my students was at a lecture by a well-known author in America who has written about the American, early American settlers who were revolutionaries. And he calls the book The Return of the Revolutionaries. His name is Simcoe, Siemkow. And that book talks about, you know, like who Marianne Williamson is or who Donald Walsh was, and defines their roles as coming back. And so when people started saying to me, well, you know, we're worried about World War III, or we're worried about this or about that, I would say, look at that book. It's full of stories. Those people wouldn't be back if they thought everything was going to blow up. They just wouldn't.
Where in the US are you born? And
born in a small town called Elyria, Ohio, and that's just outside of Cleveland.
Yeah.
And I do have siblings. I was one of 6 children.
Oh.
I have 3. I'm one of 3 now who are still living. So I have an older brother and a younger brother, and then a sister still living, and 2 have gone on.
Are you the only one who pursued this path of the mysticism?
You know, it's so interesting. like my sons, everyone has the gift. And I absolutely adore my sister, and she's been a real boon in my life.
Your nickname, can we just give that 1 minute?
So I teach people how to connect with their higher self and get 100% accuracy. A lot of people say, well, connect with your higher self or meditate or whatever. And, what does that mean? I always had monkey mind. I could never stop the chatter because I was always busy thinking about something. When you have a lot of systems going, you're thinking about all of it at once. So I knew that it was important. And because of the work with the Merkaba, this meditation that's all about sacred geometry, I knew that it was important because we had to seek permission from the higher self to get to the next step. We had to get permission. So I wanted a very specific way to get that higher self connection. I felt that people in the corporate world that I knew wouldn't be interested if they didn't have a concrete way to approach it and be able to achieve something. So I asked in meditation for a way to give people the practical explanation of why it works and how it works. And I'll give you that kind of lineage so you can track with me and understand what I was seeking and how I found it. So I basically made a clear intention, no different than Einstein when he wanted to understand light before he developed the theory of relativity. He actually spoke to the light beam and asked to ride the light beam so he could understand it in his own musings and meditations. And that's where he got the theory of relativity. A lot of people don't realize that. So I intentionally asked for this kind of information. And one of the things I was shown is that we all make decisions based upon our history. You look something up, you check online and see what they're saying. Let's say you're going to buy a car. So you're doing all this history, you're checking with your friends if they have that car, and you're doing a test drive, but it's all historical data that you use to make a decision. So what I was shown is that when you're working with the higher self, you need to have a practice period where you don't pay attention to why you're getting a certain answer. And the only way to do that is to ask unimportant questions. So for a period of 45 days, a person who joins this practice actually asks unimportant, insignificant questions. And we do a little meditation where we ask the higher self to give us a symbol or a signal. And this is something that you can feel kinesthetically. So some people feel their higher self like an itchy finger or an itchy ear. Some people have a sensation in their head. Some people see a color. Some people see a picture. And some people don't get anything. And the people who don't get anything are in my category because I couldn't get anything. So I had to work on it and develop what I call a workaround. And I will share with you that I was so surprised that so many people, when I would take them through this meditation to ask their higher self a yes, no, neutral signal, each one separately, that so many people got something right away because I was expecting I'd have to give them the workaround that I learned, but they didn't need it. So about 10%, are so mental and so anchored in their thoughts that they don't always get these outside sensations. And then we do a workaround. But then we start with the signals. And so what I'm doing is I'm teaching people, okay, now you have a signal. Let's say the signal is an itchy ear for yes. Or no, I'll give you a better one. In the book, Beyond the Flower of Life, I actually list a whole bunch of them and what people's signals were and what their messages were. So the thumbs up was yes, the thumbs down was no, and this line like this was neutral. Well, that's pretty easy. So the client who got that symbol, they could tell clearly that when they close their eyes and they ask the question, higher self, is it my highest and best good to go to the movies tonight with my friends? If they got this, they knew it was cool. Now you're asking about things you don't care about for 6 weeks. And the reason is so that you develop a history. That history then becomes anchored in you. And it turns out it takes 45 days or 6 weeks, a little over 6 weeks, to get new DNA. So by doing this practice, and you have to be in a playful place. You have to be so playful that you don't care about what your higher self says, but you have to be willing to do it. And you set aside all the other forms of divination, no muscle testing, none of that. You make a narrow focus, just like you don't try to learn French and German at the same time. So
Do you need to be in a special place, or can you do it like randomly?
Do it randomly. You can do it while you're on the train, you know, while you're riding in a car or bus. So one day a woman comes to class and she's dressed in a very strange combination of clothing and jewelry. And, you know, women have this tendency to look each other over. And it's mostly because those of us who are doing that, we like fashion. You know, we're looking, oh, I like her earrings, or I like her top, or whatever, you know. And so this woman who had come in with this very strange combination, I'm observing the whole thing. She's noticing this other lady giving her that look. And it's not a bad look. It's just, you know, like, wow. And the woman shook her finger and said, don't even ask. My higher self dressed me today. Because the idea is to be playful and to be willing to do it. So if you're not willing to wear the red shoes with the purple dress, don't ask. Just wear the shoes you'd like to wear with the purple dress.
That's so good. Yeah. I actually read that exercise before our meeting today, and I said to myself, here it is. This is what I have been looking for, a simple, easy way, but still with strict framework. Right,
and very practical. You can put it to work. Now, when you ask me about being a practical mystic and how does that, you know, where does that fit in all this? As a mother of 4 children, I can tell you that when I developed this, I still had kids at home, and I used it all the time for all kinds of things. One of the early times that I used it was when I wanted to go to a seminar, and I discovered one of my sons had a college interview that was specialized. He was one of 100 students who were picked for a potential full ride scholarship. And they were to go to the college, have all these interviews, take all these exams, write essays, and then the school would announce 10 winners of full scholarships for no reason, just because we like you. And of course, in my situation, that was pretty important. I was also hoping to take a seminar that same weekend. And I had told the seminar leader that I was going to be there, but I hadn't signed up yet. And then we get this announcement, it's the same weekend. So I called the guy that's leading the seminar. I said, look, I'm not going to be able to come. It's you know, this conflict. And he said, well, you tell your ex-husband he should take your son to the college event. And I laughed. I said, you don't understand. You know, it's 8 hours drive away. If I do that, he's going to tell me to take the younger children, because nobody would want to be by themselves with all these kids in the car for an 8-hour drive. I mean, you would if you had to, but you know, based on our situation, I knew that's what would happen. So I took it into meditation, and I asked my higher self what I should do. Now, this is after the 6 weeks of practice, when you're having more than yes/no questions. You see, you're asking bigger questions. You do the practice for the 6 weeks, and then you're able to actually ask all kinds of questions, and information comes in. So I asked, what do I do? Because I really wanted to take the class. I did not want to go through the drama of getting in conflict with my ex-husband. I wanted to make sure my son was getting his opportunity. It was really a conundrum for me. And my higher self said to me, this is not your decision, Maureen. This is your son's decision. Well, that was a big aha, because that particular son had skipped first grade. He was 16. It wasn't like he was, you know, 18 getting ready for college. He was quite young. So, and then my higher self said, it's not 2 choices. There's 3 choices. That was another surprise. I wouldn't have thought of 3 choices. And the third choice was he can go by himself and fly. Again, that had never occurred to me. And certainly my mom guilt would never have given me that opportunity. So I proposed this to my son, and before I even finished the last option, you know what he chose. He said, I'm going by myself, I'll fly. I never had to approach my husband, and I was able to take the class I wanted, and I didn't have any mom guilt, because my higher self told me what to do, and also put the obligation on my son instead of me. And that's why it's so practical, because you can actually use it to solve things that you don't understand or things you want to do. And, you know, today my husband will say to me, my current husband will say to me, you know, well, why don't you check in and see if we should go to this restaurant or this restaurant for dinner tonight? Or he'll say, check in and see if I should go to this conference, or check in and ask your higher self if I should go with you when you go on your next Egypt trip, like that.
Yeah.
They're very practical, very practical.
Your husband telling you all this stuff?
Say it again.
That your new husband, your current husband?
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, my current husband is exquisitely supportive.
Oh.
He is, he's very proud of my work. And when I met him, and I didn't want to be pulled away from New York City because he was in another city, and I was definitely worried that I was supposed to be with someone from New York. And I asked, what do I do about this guy? I was told, build a bridge, which had never occurred to me that I could have two homes. And then at one point when I was trying to push him away again, because I was worried about, how can I make this work? I said to him, why do you want to be with me? I'm gone all the time. I'm traveling all the time. And he said, I'd rather be with you part-time than not at all.
Good.
That's when you know it's the right relationship.
That's beautiful. Oh, some men are so smart. I don't know what to say. Well, a lot of them are, actually. I have a very nice husband as well. So, you are an expert in the Akashic records.
Yes.
Yes. So you don't only speak about fifth dimension and all the dimensions of life. That's the 11th dimension, I learned. Mm-hmm. Or something like that.
Yes. Well, so we want to think about the dimensions like we think about music. They're a different vibration. And just like dogs can hear a higher pitch than you and I can hear, these higher dimensions are there and available to us if we knew how to get there. Initially, the mystics and the shamans were able to access this energy because they were in they had the ability to, to take their consciousness to higher and higher states. What happened more recently in the last 20 years is that a dispensation was granted for anyone to access the records, and a portal was created like a stargate. So we're not, when we go from our fifth dimensional self, our non-biased, non-judgmental self, we take that part of us and we tune or turn towards the 11th dimension, the Akashic records. We're not traversing all the dimensions in between. We're literally just going direct. It's like the express train. So, we don't have to make all those stops. We don't have to make sure we're ready for all those places. And we go and we follow a simple protocol, and that protocol allows us access. And the information in the Akashic records is for soul growth. The dispensation was granted because we're at the end of an age, an end of an era, and our technology and our spirituality aren't at a match. The technology has grown and our spirituality needs to catch up. And so that's why we now have access to the Akashic records. It's also why anybody has access. And some people are accessing the Akashic records without the protocol. And that's okay. I have no judgment about that. But the protocol ensures that you're there. And the protocol that I was given is very similar to everyone else's, but it has certain elements that aren't in everyone else's. And that's very important because we're using a connection with ascended masters. We're asking for only a connection of divine light. We're doing clearing work, which is very important. So we're ready and we're not affected by other energies that might be influencing us. There's lots of things like that we do. But it's a fun thing to learn. And the most powerful thing about being in the Akashic records is the advice. Because when you ask a question, why is my brother mad at me? Or why is my brother so upset about this statement that I made? And you get the answer, they then tell you what to do. Oh. And that's mind-boggling. And I'll give you an example. There was a man who asked on a radio show about an adult daughter. And maybe she was like a young adult, maybe 18 or 19 years old. But she was definitely angry with her dad and opposing him. And there was just this butting of heads. And he felt like he'd been a good father. He was a spiritual teacher himself and, had worked with people and had, very pure intentions. And he couldn't figure out what he'd done wrong to cause this, since we believe that we are the makers of our reality. And in the records, the record keepers told him that they had been adversaries in a previous lifetime and that he had gone on to evolve, but she had not. And he had agreed to sponsor her. And she still saw him as his adversary. And then they said, we would like to tell you what to do. And proceeded to explain to him that he needed to love her anyway. He needed to continue to send presents or cards or notes, texts, whatever he would normally do, as if they were on good terms like he wanted, and to not have any expectation on when this would happen. And then they said it will take a few years. It could take 3 years. Now, as an individual, as a parent, if you knew your child was pushing you away and you wanted so badly to have some kind of connection, you would do anything to fix it. If you knew it was going to take 3 years, you would put everything you had into those 3 years, because you would know that it would soon be over. You would stop judging it. And remember I said at the beginning of our interview that one of my sons pushed me away because he had such a gift? One day when I had gotten fired from my job, I had no money in the bank because I'd just written a check to him for $2,000 for his college tuition. I'm feeling a little exposed and scared. And I remember saying in my thought, I want to know when he's going to appreciate me, because I'm thinking about, I shouldn't have written that check yesterday. And my guide came in and said, when he's 28, I burst out laughing. I'm thinking tomorrow would be good, or the day after, so I don't feel so guilty about putting myself at risk. And when I burst out laughing, I realized that even though I didn't think I expected him to do anything, there was still a little bit of desire in that category. So I unhooked from that. I decided that the reason I was writing those checks in the first place was because I wanted to. I wanted to be able to do that as a parent. Mm-hmm. My father had done it for me, and I wanted to do it for my son. And it didn't matter whether he appreciated it or not. That was on him. Yeah. That was a big shift. Yeah. I didn't have to wait.
Wonderful. So how many years did you jump? 12 years or something? 10 years?
Well, he was like 24 when I was told that. So that would have been 4 years, and I think I waited maybe 2.
So talking about the 5D, the fifth dimension, and the Akashic records. So you have written books about the Akashic records, and now the last book that you wrote was about 5D. So what drove you, what inspired you to write this book, and how do you see they are coming together?
The book Waking Up in 5D was an important part of the transition of information that was coming through in my daily meditations and helping me understand my own reality. And as I would take this information to my students in the classroom, I was getting validation that they were having similar experiences, and I began to recognize that they needed the information I was giving. So I was journaling and keeping good records. And that's how that book evolved. And remember I said in the early days, I knew I could teach, but I wanted to write a book. So I used the teaching to help inspire the book writing. And I would understand what people wanted or needed to understand because of the questions that would come up that allowed me to help people to understand what was going on for them, because much of what they were experiencing, I was experiencing, and we were able to track and make it work. One of the things that I found with both of those books is that people need and want very practical, down-to-earth, concrete ways to do something, and that people who are highly motivated are the ones that are going to put in the effort and do that. And a lot of people who fit into that category are perfectly willing to train themselves, to sit down and do the work. And maybe they don't have time to show up on a class because they're here and there and everywhere, but they would be willing to sit down and write the book or read the book and then do the practices and the tools. And I put what I know works and all the things I've learned in those books. For example, going to the Akashic records, I was shown that there were certain sensations that existed when you are in the Akashic records. So, for example, when you open to the Akashic records, a lot of people experience what I call a white noise. And it's that sound that you hear, but it's inside your head and it's very faint, but it's there and you can feel it. It's like a background. Another sensation that some people have was pressure on the chest. Some people feel what I call the pulse, and it's a slow, intense beat. A lot of people feel this quality of being nurtured, and I call it the hammock effect. So, I was able to get all this information from the students in the classroom and their experiences, and then weave it into the storyline so that I could actually write a whole section called markers. And those are markers in the book that allow you to know you're in the records. And just like when you, in the old-fashioned days, when you send a fax and you get that awful sound, you know you're connected and the fax is going to go through. So this is a way to know that you actually are in the records. And then there's other ways, for example, the way they talk to you. And that's one of the markers. And it's a very loving way. And in the records, they will use your vocabulary, but they will use words in an unusual way that you don't use in your everyday talking. And they also use words that are in your vocabulary that you don't use every day. In a class I was teaching last night, her record keeper said something about not like the megalomania you had before. And I burst out laughing. I said, there's no way I imagine you saying that word in conversation. And she said, it's true. I would never say that word in conversation. So there's those kinds of tools that help people to get it and to apply what they're learning. So what I see is the book writing is that opportunity to reach a wider audience than I could in the classroom. And the classroom is helping me write the books. Yeah. So I'm very grateful to all the students. I often tell the students that you are benefiting from all the students who've gone before you, because I have been paying attention. I'm learning too. And as a teacher, I consider myself a learner.
The history curve.
Yeah.
What is the fifth dimension? Very shortly, what is it? You said it's accessible to everyone, but why should we aim for it? What's in it for us? And what's the difference to where we most of the time are?
Okay, so first I'll start out with a favorite prayer that I teach people. And again, this is a big, long story that I'm not going to tell, but you can find it in one of my books. And that is, I am asking for a day of heaven on earth for me and everyone I come in contact with. I'm starting out with that because the fast and easy definition of fifth dimension is heaven on earth. It's what the traditional churches teach us, is heaven. You having a good day, your communications are good, everything's working, everything's coming together. Fifth dimension is like that. That's the first quality. The second quality is you're in such a yummy state that stuff doesn't bother you. So when you first fall in love, you're in that state. I'll call it fifth dimension. And the proof of it is when you're in your car and somebody cuts you off, maybe they're not paying attention. They don't even know they cut you off. We've all heard the word road rage. Road rage isn't even a concept when you fall in love. You're just looking at that situation. Oh, they're probably having a rough day. You don't care. You're so blissed out. You're like, stuff happens. People make mistakes. It's okay. And you don't even mind. But if you're in a hurry and you're worried about it, or the traffic's heavy, or you're worried about your boss, or your job, or your kids, and that happens, then you react. That's 3D. So the contrast is very clear once you begin to understand it. Now, what is 4D? I like to joke around that 4D is like a big train station or a big airport. It's the place you go to get where you want to go. It's not a place you want to hang out. So,
it sounds messy on the train station.
Say it again?
It sounds messy on the train station.
Indeed, it is. And the train station is, analogy for fourth dimension is very useful because it helps people understand that 4D isn't someplace you want to go. It's a place that you want to be passing through. And as a musician, I can tell you that 4D is like a G7 chord, or a transition to resolve to a major chord. You have the the seventh or the fifth that you produce. And I'll ask anybody who's a musician, you'll hear this. If I sing the major chord 1, 3, 5, and I'll sing it for you, I'll play with you here. I'll be very spontaneous.
Yeah.
1, 3, 5, 3, 1. 1, 4, 4, 4 wants to go to 3, or 4 wants to go to 5. And I'm playing here, but you can hear it. So if you have an ear that catches that kind of thing, you can understand that's what 4 is like. Fourth dimension, literally, is this place of transition. And so, but it's also a place of higher emotion. And when you are in a big upset, someone has died, you've lost your job, you're in fourth, you go to that zone of anxiety and stress. But it's also a place, because it's closer to fifth, a lot of times people have mystical experiences when they're in these high emotional states. And we've all read about that. Fifth dimension is this place where we have no judgment. There is no karma. And that's huge. So how do you explain no karma? And I'd like to quote from a channel message that came through when I was teaching in Hong Kong a few years back. And Sana Kumara said, the game of judgment in 3D is over. The game will end when there are no more players. And there's a whole lot more about that, but to take that in and say, oh, if I stop judging myself, there's no more karma? Yeah, that's true. But it also means you have to project it outwards. Well, what if somebody owes you $5,000? Well, you have to decide that it's okay, that money's coming back to you another way, and you don't care how or when. And that person's free. It doesn't mean that people who have committed a crime don't have their own form of resolution, their own form of restitution, so that they will change and be different. What it means is that you don't have to hold them against you. It holds you up. You can go to 5D and know that it's going to take care of itself. And that's a big, big change for the way we used to think. You know, I've had situations where I didn't want to let go of my experience because I was wounded pretty bad.
You were what? You were wounded.
Wounded pretty deeply. And then you kind of take a half a step back and go, you know what? I don't have to give free rent to that person in my head. I can, unhook from that and say, that's what they did. That's on them. They'll straighten it out on themselves. In the meantime, I'm going to stay in alignment with my divine self. I'll get everything I need. I'm connected. I have this connection. So that's probably the hardest part about understanding 5D. But when you realize, just like that story about the lost sunglasses, but in 5D, there's this mellowness. And we've all been in kitchens where the cook will say, oh yeah, the recipe called for cream of mushroom soup, but I didn't have any, so I used this and this, and it worked out fine. And you kind of think to yourself, yeah, the soup is really good. That's amazing. Why didn't I think of that?
Exactly. Yeah, you don't always have to follow the steps.
Yes, especially when you're experienced. And also when you have this connection, you know what you need to know. As a practical person, when I was still working in the corporate world, I remember being told to make a phone call to a newspaper man who I wanted to write a story about my charity that I was director of development for. And I'd been trying to reach him all day, couldn't get through. 5 minutes till 5, I get this very clear message from my higher self, call the guy now. And I'm arguing with my higher self, no, I got to get home. I got to fix dinner for my kids. Call him now. No, I don't want to. I want to go home. Call him now. This is the third time. Now, when I will tell people that when you get the higher self connection going and you've done your practice for 6 weeks, when your higher self tells you to do something, you want to do it. And that's another level where you decide you're always going to follow your higher self. I don't know that I've gotten to that place yet. So I'm arguing with my higher self. But the third time I bite the bullet. I say, okay, fine. I call on the phone, this guy. And the first words out of his mouth were, Maureen, how did you know I would even be here at this time? All I could do is what you're doing. I laughed. What's even better is my story made the front page of the newspaper the next day. And the Pope was in town. And my story was the top headline, and the Pope was the middle headline.
Oh, nice.
A riot?
I'm a PR girl. I've been working in PR for a long time.
You could use this.
Yeah. Wonderful story. So, how much of your time do you spend in 5D?
Probably 80%. I don't know. I've never asked myself that question. A lot depends upon if somebody's pushing my buttons.
So you're still a person that you can push buttons on?
Well, I had an incident with a little grandchild who needed clearing, and he behaved badly, and the scenario was very uncomfortable for a grandma because the mom had said, keep an eye on the kids while I'm in the bathroom and getting dressed, which I was willing to do. And then when the child got out a new game and he wasn't allowed to do that when she's around, because it's this principle, put away the old game and then get out the new game. I said, honey, let's put this one away first. And he burst into tears, threw a tantrum. And of course, the mom comes out. And, oh yeah, he can play with that. And I'm like, what? So, I mean, I'm human, I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to be a good grandma, but I also wanted to follow what the mom wanted. And when I was trying to follow what the mom wanted, and I still got my hand slapped, I think you could say I got my buttons pushed.
Is it a constant reminder to be in 5D, or does it flow easily to be there?
It flows easily, and that's what I talk about in the book, that once you decide you're going to be in gratitude, once you're going to decide to stop judging yourself or others. See, each personality type is different, but there's two basic things that happen. People are either projecting their anger and disappointment at themselves onto other people and saying, well, they should have been on time, or they should have done this, or they're projecting it on themselves. I should have gotten their report done sooner, whatever it is. But people usually have one pattern or the other. So once you stop that pattern of blame, either outside of you or inside of you, that's huge. That allows you to move into 5D very easily, because blame locks you down. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is gratitude. When you're in gratitude, you're grateful for whatever you can find around you. I'm grateful for a beautiful day in New York. I'm grateful for a lovely apartment. I'm grateful for all the tools and equipment we have. I love equipment. I'm grateful for being able to get organic food. All those little things that I really care about, and then I move into gratitude about, that helps me stay uplifted. And it's kind of like that word, uplifting. When my husband and I were doing like a little treasure map about where we wanted to be and what our next location was, he said, I want to be in a neighborhood that's uplifting. And I said, what does that mean? I don't understand. And he said, well, when you walk down the street for a walk, the houses look nice. There's no trash in the front. The houses aren't decrepit or looking like they need work. The people care about themselves and their cars. Those kinds of things are important, but I had never thought to name it. So when we're in gratitude and we start to name what we're grateful for, we actually attract more of things we can be grateful for, because the universe can sense what we care about, what fashion we care about, what environment we care about. And so we attract that by being grateful. That's probably the most important thing. And that's why this special prayer, I am asking for a day of heaven on earth, is so very important, because we're claiming that energy of peace and joy. It doesn't mean you're not going to, it doesn't mean you won't have a drama, but the drama is resolvable. The drama is able to be handled, and you're able to be calm in the drama. When I had a baby who was crying, and I had the baby on my front pack and he was crying, I would be all anxious and upset, at least with my first son. I noticed one of my other sons with his first child, that this baby was crying and he was laughing and smiling and holding the baby. He was so happy to have a baby on his chest. What a concept, you see? So that place of joy comes out of gratitude. So the gratitude comes, and then the joy comes from the grace of the gratitude. And that joy kind of anchors you in.
For me and for our readers who are now learning to understand that we actually do have time, we spend time in 5D as well every day. How do you recognize when you are out of frequency, when you step out of 5D? How do you, is there like a quick fix where you see yourself from that you're actually out of frequency?
Yes, and again, it goes back to that statement. I'm asking for Dave, heaven on earth for me and everyone I come in contact with. So then you're standing in line at the bank, and there's a altercation between the person in front of you and the teller, and you know there's this butting of heads, some kind of craziness. Now it's your turn with the same teller, and you know she's already crabby or anxious, but when you come, she just like everything drops, her anger drops, her frustration drops, and she shifts instantly because she's in your vibe, she's in your field. So you're maintaining that. When something happens that frightens you or shocks you, it'll drop you into 3D faster because you're not expecting it. You know, you have to stop the car suddenly, and you're worried about the groceries in the back or the children in the back. That would jolt you back into 3D. If somebody slaps you, or you know, just physical violence, that would mark you down into 3D. So there are situations that will drop you into 3D. What usually happens is your awareness of being 5D comes when you're laying in bed at night and you're thinking about your day, and you begin to realize, oh yeah, this other person was always crabby and today they were super yummy. I wonder what was different. Remember that question?
Yeah, exactly.
You can add wonder to it. So what is going on? Or I wonder what, blah, blah, blah. I wonder why this worked. And when you ask the wonder question, the universe will supply the answer, and you will know that it was something you did. And what I have come to notice is that when I do that little self-reflection at night when I go to bed, and I don't always remember to do it, sometimes I'm like sound asleep the minute my head hits the pillow, but when I do it and I ask that wonder question, I wonder why, or I wonder what's going on, or I wonder what caused this, instantly that answer comes in. And if it doesn't, by morning I know. And that is quite powerful, because then you can avoid those triggers. Both, I wonder what caused me to be so upset, or I wonder what caused this thing to go so smoothly when this person's usually pretty difficult. Mm-hmm. You know, when I had that incident with my grandson, my first reaction was human. Mm-hmm. But my second reaction was, I wonder why he's behaving that way, because he didn't have terrible twos and he's such a sweet little boy. And the answer was because he picked up an entity, and there was this whole big drama that happened at his preschool. And there apparently was a very angry child giver, and the little one picked up all her crap, took it off of her, which was a good thing because he had a grandma that would clear it. But it, you know, it took a sequence of events, you know. So we look at these things and we find, okay, there is a solution here. We can find an answer. So
what is your quick fix to raise your frequency once you're out of it?
Say that prayer again. I'm asking for a day of heaven on earth. I'm asking for a meeting of heaven on earth for me and everyone I'm going to come in contact with.
Not just something you write in the book. You really use this one.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess that's why I'm so happy with the moniker, practical mystic, because I want to use these tools in everyday life. I use my higher self all the time, both on big decisions and little ones.
So what do you hope that our readers will take with them from reading?
My first desire is that they recognize that they've already been 5D. That will empower them to know that they can go back there. First time you go anywhere, Disneyland, wherever, you can find your way back. And that's very powerful. It's like, oh, okay, cool, I can do that. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I hope they pull away from the book lots of tools that they can use and expand upon. And there's lots of tools in the book.
I can confirm that.
And thirdly, I expect that they will have a new framework with which to define their experiences that will help them perceive their experiences in a new light. And every time they catch themselves saying, that's weird, or that's strange, that they could take a half a step back and say, wait a minute, what's really going on? And when they do that and they start to trade that weird phrase for the what's going on phrase, they will be given a wide berth of information. And going back to that whole story about stuff disappearing and reappearing, when I asked, almost inadvertently, when something had disappeared, instead of asking where my stuff was, which was my old habit, and my new habit was the what question, I was told, Maureen, you were in a higher dimension when you put it down. What a concept. I certainly didn't think that. I was thinking more like, we're sending monkeys in space to test how it goes. How is it going? So your stuff's moving into fifth dimension just kind of as a test, as a preparation. It's pretty hilarious because we think things through. But when we step back and allow the answer to float in, because the parameters are so different that we're not changing the rules, we're changing the game. And it's like the difference between American football and soccer. The rest of the world plays soccer. Americans play hard football. And the rules are completely different. That's huge. Once you understand it's a different game, then learning new rules are much easier because you're not trying to make the old rules fit under the new rules. You're just throwing the whole thing out and saying, this is a new game. Very powerful. And that would be probably the most important thing for people to get, that they have the choice. Will they be the first to leave or the last?
Is there anything else you want to say to our Swedish audience?
I am delighted to be invited into your home, into your living room, your bedroom, wherever you're watching this. And I want you to know that you can acquire these skills, that you can be fifth dimensional, and that you can bring it on. And the way to bring it on is to do that simple prayer. I'm asking for a day of heaven on earth for me, everyone I come in contact with, and watch how your world changes.
That's so nice. I will start doing that every day. Maureen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to meet me. We've been talking for much longer than we should, but I'm grateful.
I'm grateful too, and it was a delight to get to know you and to speak with you. And I am so grateful to have an audience such as yours that could listen to me speaking in English and be so fluent. I am very grateful for that.
Thank you, Maureen. Enjoy a lovely day in New York.